has mentioned. There
Right,
we are.
now we hand over to Dan Asaw from the Field Studies Council. He's going to talk about exploring the digital world, teaching natural history using a learning management system. So over to you, Dan.
Hi, so my name's Dan, and I am a Learning Development Officer for the Field Studies Council Biodiversity Team. And that's a very long and convoluted way of saying I basically help oversee, along with my team, the online biodiversity courses. So these are vast. They range from things like spiders and bees, introduction to ferns, lichens is a really big one at the moment, but also things like biodiversity net gain and nature writing as well. So quite a nice stretch and a broad thing in regards to courses. So you've heard a little bit from Kieran about I was part of the BioLinks team and what BioLinks did, but essentially I sort of popped into the team at the beginning of I think 2021, so it was like peak COVID, and my original I guess what I was employed to do was to start and facilitate tutors within our field centres and deliver courses in person. Obviously, COVID said, no, we're not doing that. And as a result, we had to swivel quite quickly. Kieran had already started doing some webinars on iRecord, so sort of facilitating biological recording and that sort of generation of biological records, which was great. And he kind of realised that it was great and it did something and there was a positive output for that, but he kind of felt like it was lacking something. And he wanted some more interactivity, so things like assignments and quizzes. And what he realised is that within the Field Studies Council already, we had a learning management system in the form of Moodle. So he went, well, can we use this? Because initially it was for compliance. So it's all those really, really exciting training things you have to do as part of work. So, fire safety and how to pick up heavy things without completely wrecking your spine. So Kieran went, can we reuse this for something else? And that's kind of where the entire biodiversity program of courses kind of really came from. So I'm here to talk about using an LMS or a learning management system, which essentially is any system that can be used to help manage learners and sort of post educational content. There's lots of different versions of this. There's third-party ones where you can sort of just sign up online and you can put your things in, things like Learn Worlds and stuff like that. But we use an LMS called Moodle. So Moodle's been around for a long, long time and it's been doing its thing. It's a free software, so you can download it completely for free, and it's completely open source. So if you've got the know-how and the knowledge, you can have a good old play with it. If you're a Moodle developer, the amazing things that Moodle developers can do are absolutely insane. But it's not as easy as I'll pick it in and plug it in. You need to have some form of technical experience to do it. And we had this already in house because we had a Moodle specialist at the time. I think his name's Andy, and he sort of like put some stuff together and we were already using it within the organization itself. So I've already mentioned it was used internally for training, and Kieran basically repurposed this and went, can we use this to do something else? It was the next logical step from the webinars, as I've already said, and he was going to move forward and go from there. So luckily, I came from a position where I'd already been playing around with Moodle, so I kind of knew some of the functionality, which helped a lot. So main aims were to deliver the project goals, despite COVID getting in the way. We didn't really have another choice apart from just to stop it entirely. But we wanted to improve the knowledge of particular focus groups still within our participants. So these we chose quite early on because we had the specialisms within the team. So I'm a beetle guy, we had Aaron who was a bee guy, and we had Kieran who, if you didn't know already, is a worm guy. So we very quickly developed those and put those together and had an idea of how to sort of move forward and what courses we were going to do. We wanted to improve the ID skills and confidence of the people that were participating in our courses. And that's what we wanted. And we realized quite early on that it was quite well suited to sort of act as a funnel to do that introductory, that baseline knowledge that people need before they go and do something, for example, playing on a microscope, or really getting into the nitty gritty of species identification. And what it allowed us to do is to sort of prep people before they came to our field centres when COVID started opening up again. And it was a great way to do that. We also wanted to continue the aims of the BioLinks project, which was to contribute to an increase in biological recording. So that's what we ultimately wanted these online courses to do. So we kind of decided on a format, and our format was one of two. So we had tutor-led courses, which essentially was a course that had workbooks with static information in, and it would have videos, H5P, which is kind of like the new age Flash, if you remember Flash. So interactive elements within the pages, but also things like quizzes. But in the middle of that, we have a tutor. So a tutor can respond to things via an interactive forum, for example. You would have marked assignments and just a really nice back and forth. And then we'd have a webinar at the end of most weeks. So at the end of, especially in the BioLinks courses, at the end, we would have a weekly webinar where they would kind of mop up any questions about the content that people have gone through, pick out any misconceptions, and sort of really sort of hone what's happening. And there was a great chance to tailor as well. You could tailor what your cohort wanted. Oh, do you know what? There's a few people on here that want to learn about this specific thing. I can pull out something and we can talk about that in a bit more detail. And it allowed every course to be slightly different depending on what the cohort required or needed or wanted. The opposite to this is the self-study courses. So this was kind of exactly the same thing in that it had all of the same elements, but what it lacked was that interactivity for things like forum posts. It didn't have a marked assignments, and we didn't have the webinars. Self-study courses were great for very many things, but it's quite good for getting a lot of people to a point very, very quickly. Yeah, we'll talk about what sort of happened afterwards. So here we are. So these are our stats from the BioLinks. So we did this for a year and a half, 2 years of delivery, essentially. So 2021 till the beginning of 2023, I guess. So we had 14 self-study online training courses. This is runs. So this includes repeats of certain courses. So you might run the same course a few different times throughout the 2-3 years. We had 22 tutor-led online training courses. And we dealt with a lot of people. So for self-study, it allowed us to rack them high quite quickly because you don't have to worry about that managing of people within webinars as much. And we had 2,622 people, which was fantastic. And we worked with people like Butterfly Conservation to help a lot of their volunteers and stuff get to a certain point and learn some identification skills and skills of biological recording and using things like iRecord as well. And a little less, so just under 2,000 for students completing online training courses. What's a really fair point here is this is actually completion rates. So these are the amount of people that have completed, not actually gone on a course, which is very, very different. I would say at least a third of people, when they go onto online courses, will kind of drop out halfway through for reasons. There are many different reasons, but you do get that drop in engagement. So this specifically because it was something that we were measuring for the BioLinks project that we wrote down. So that's insane. So you've got to think the people that probably engaged is significantly higher than those numbers I've given you. As Kieran had mentioned, we measured some things for evaluative purposes. So one of them was the usefulness score. So we've got 4.6 and 4.7. So here, tutor-led online was a little bit more useful, which kind of makes sense because you've got people who can tailor those learning experiences, which is cool. And then the enjoyment score, 4.6 and 4.6, which I thought was pretty good. Like that's on par. And I would expect it maybe to be a little bit different and maybe a bit higher for tutor-led online courses, but it was actually the same. Kieran pointed out earlier that it is still a bit lower than if you're doing in person. We were getting really, really high, like 4.8, 4.9, 5s for the in-person courses. So it's a little bit lower than that. So it's definitely not like a complete alternative. I think it's something that you can use alongside with other training opportunities, absolutely. And then we've got a level of change. So what we did is we had a metric which essentially shows how far people have perceived to have learned. So we asked them to score themselves at the beginning of the course and at the end of the course, and basically to say, you know, where do you see yourself? Are you introductory, beginner, intermediate, or advanced? And they got to choose. So 1.0 is essentially a whole jump from, let's say, intermediate to beginner or beginner to intermediate or intermediate to advanced. They are completely subjective. So they're definitely not an indicator of actually how much better they are, but it's definitely a understanding of their confidence level and their perceived knowledge attainment, which is cool, really, really cool. In total, we had 4,589 participants completing courses, online courses within those 2 years, which is pretty snazzy, I think, personally. So just to put that learner progression into some form of visual format, because I'm a visual learner, I like visual things. So here we've got self-study and tutor-led, that learner progression at the beginning before they've completed the course. And you can see they're very much pushed towards introductory and beginner. And then after the course, we've got a nice little push over to the other side where there's that perceived knowledge and that additional confidence that, oh, I've learned something. I know I'm a bit better now, which is great. And that's what we wanted. And even if people aren't becoming advanced experts and regional experts within the field, what it is saying is there's a bit more confidence within the group of people that went through those courses. And if they're more confident, they're more likely, I would say, to sort of get involved with things like biological recording or just get more involved in that taxonomic group in itself, which was what we wanted. So at the end, well, at the beginning of 2023, sort of the BioLinks project came to a close. We actually finished delivery a bit earlier on the year before. But then we kind of continued doing this within the Field Studies Council. And we had the Eco Skills team, which was in 2022. And then we turned it into the Biodiversity team, which kind of spread out a bit more. So here we can see the course runs, which are so the number in brackets essentially is the number of individual different courses that we have. And then the number that's not in brackets is the amount of runs that we've put on. So as you can see, there's duplicates in some cases. For some self-study courses, you might run that 4, 5, 6, 7 times in the year because it's like a rolling stock. Whereas others you might only do once because one isn't the demand for it, and two, it might be a bit more involved to run itself. As you can see, participants is gradually increasing over time, which is great. And then we've got the enjoyment score. So enjoyment score is 4.55, 4.43, and we're getting a drop in enjoyment, which is interesting because we are continuously updating it and sort of putting those courses in. And I think this might be partly to do with online learning becoming the norm now. Like in BioLinks, it was like this new, like no one was really doing natural history courses. There are other things there, and it's a bit more normal and it's less novel. And also just people's expectations of what is delivered in an online course is vastly different to what it was when we began in 2021, 2022. Now there's a lot more higher expectations of what people can do. People are aware and seeing lots of different things. So although I'm quite happy with the enjoyment scores, we always want to push the boundaries, and it's continuously going through and updating courses that we have. You can see that at the beginning, we sort of had this massive increase, almost twice as many between 2022 and 2023 of the amount of courses that we were running. But actually that started to slow down, and that's because we've had to go back and refine and update and make sure that things are working properly. And because of that increased expectation of what it should be, and also the knowledge that we've learned in the process, has allowed us to continually update and just make courses better, and making sure that all the best practices that we've learned along the way are being implemented. So there is a slowdown as you sort of go back and refine stuff. But as a result, our courses are a lot better and a lot better received, I think, personally. Okay, so lessons learned. I've told you what we did, but I'm going to tell you what we learned from it, because there's a hell of a lot that we've learned. So first of all, you'll need more time. Whatever you're thinking of doing, it will take twice as long as you expected to. And what's really difficult with trying to work out how much time something is it will depend vastly on what you're trying to build a course on. If it is a subject that has very little resources out there, it means instead of being able to go, oh, do you know what, there's a great resource out here, and linking to it and sort of signposting people to it and utilizing that and showing people maybe how to use that resource, you've got to make that from scratch, and that takes time. Other things as well, videos. Everyone underestimates how long it takes to sort out videos. A 2.5-minute video, 2.5 minutes of your learner's time, can take you a day to put together. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's longer. It depends on how many visuals you've got. You might want to outsource it, who knows? But what I'm telling you is there's this misconception that it's very easy to do. You can chuck it on a page, let it go, way, there it is. it takes so much longer than that. Just playing around with HTML, or even if you're using interactive elements within your courses, it will take you a couple of hours. What you think is a 10-minute job is probably a 2-hour job. So always take that into account when you're thinking, oh, I've got to budget my time to do this. The other thing is review, review, review. So there are two sides to this. One is you want to review your content as many times as humanly possible before it goes out. As part of BioLinks, we had one course, it was terrestrial invertebrates, and we actually put a set of voluntary testers that went through, and they basically plowed it to pieces. There were like grammar Nazis in there. It was amazing. Like, it was absolutely incredible. I think there were 20 people on that. They were on there for 2 weeks, and they made me cry at the scathing remarks that they gave us. No, they didn't. They were fantastic, amazing. One of our grammar Nazis, Martin, was the best, but you had to take everything not to heart, otherwise it'd make you cry. But ultimately, it was a better course as a result. Even though we had 20 people, at least 5 amazing grammar Nazis. There was someone whose dad worked in a print's work, so he had amazing input and insight. Yeah, 20 people, 2 weeks, did all that. And even then, people come back and, oh, this is yeah, you might want to sort that out, or oh, there's a typo there. It's insane. Like, the amount of times you need to review something is one more time than you have the time or capacity to do, always. Like, it's just how it is. Off the back of this as well, when you're running courses, you need to have time to evaluate and go back and refine. Oh, do you know what? That didn't work. We put together a discovering lichens course, really good feedback, fantastic. We got a little bit of feedback going, do you know what? That might make more sense if it's swapped over. So we did, and it was amazing. But we had to have that evaluation time factored in to be able to do that. So especially with new courses, you'll always go back and go, do you know what? That didn't work as well as I thought it would. Let's change it up and switch it up a little bit. The other thing is hidden costs. So I mentioned that Moodle is free and it's an open source software that you can just download and change and move stuff around, and it's fantastic. But nothing is truly free in this world. So you've got to pay for things like hosting. So the amount of people you have on there and stuff will affect that. Fairly standard costs you might take into account. Memory, so you're continuously having to update servers. The more people you have, the more information they're putting in, the more memory you might need. If you're doing this through a third-party resource, there might be limitations on the amount of learners you have or the amount of things they can do, or it might be based on payment plans. So when you're looking at LMSs, it's always a consideration you'll need to think of. How big am I going to get? How can I scale this? What's the cost associated with that going to be? So that's really, really important. Other things are things like updates and even tech support as well. If something goes down, if your server goes down, if you need to manually put in your updates, then you need to consider that. And it will cost time to do it. And so you might have some downtime for servers. You might have to put less courses on or stop course delivery for a certain period of time. But also you might have to have a specialist to do it. So Moodle is big and scary, and you need some form of digital know-how. Whether or not you can do that with your existing digital teams, that's great. But if you can't, you need to outsource it, and you'll need to find someone. And it's not cheap. It's thousands of pounds, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds, depending on what sort of support you need or require. It might be that instead of having something like Moodle, you go for a third-party resource and you pay them. But then there are always, if an update happens, you have no control on what happens or how that happens. The other thing is integration. So if you already have digital infrastructure, if you've already got booking pages, if you've already got a website, how is that going to fit in? If you've got development teams for both, you're going to need to factor in that time for them to talk to each other and work together and make sure that those systems work seamlessly. It sounds like a really simple thing to say, but it's not always as easy, and it can take a lot of time. And there's a lot of managing relationships there as well. The other thing, I've kind of mentioned tech support. So we currently have got some special Moodle specialists that if something doesn't work in Moodle for whatever reason, we can go to them, and we've got an ongoing subscription as a result. So we've got call out times and things like that, and they're amazing. They're great, and they fix stuff very, very quickly. But the other thing as well is you are tech support, as Kieran mentioned earlier. You are tech support to all of your learners, all your course participants, and they come to you first. A lot of things are people not really understanding how to use something. We counteracted that over time by adding lots and lots of how to do this videos and this is how you do that, and oh, you don't know how to upload to a forum, this is how you do it. But it takes a lot of time to do that, and until we had all of those in place, it was sapping up so much of our time. We actually had to hire as part of the BioLinks team, but also within the online biodiversity team, an administrator to help take some of this load off, because what was happening is our developers, or it was me in BioLinks, but our developers just got completely snowballed by all of these. I don't know how to do this. Can you help me do this? Can you sort that out? Whatever. And it just takes up so much. I was losing like days in a week just responding to tech queries just from people, which are quite simple. Nowadays we have an FAQ, and we've got lots of how you do these things, and we've got an entire resource in every single course which goes, oh, by the way, if you need to do this, this is how you do it. And we can just literally give them that link, and 9 times out of 10 it'll sort our problems out for us, and then everyone else, the admin, will typically pick that up. It's only if it's a big thing that doesn't seem to be working for some reason will it really get past admin and those stages nowadays, which is saves so much time, but there is that cost associated with that staff time. So get them outside is probably the biggest thing that we wanted to do within BioLinks. Kieran was adamant that we were going to get people outside, and instead of just have them sat at a computer and learning these things, to actually put them into practice and try and utilize some of those skills. It's something we continue to do, whether or not it's a compulsory activity for the completion of the course, or if it's a, by the way, do this and we might talk about it. Sometimes they're just talking points in webinars, but they are fantastic. And it gives learners so much opportunity to, one, demonstrate what they're learning, but two, really engage with it as well. And I think if you're not engaging with people, then how are you going to get those messages across and your aims as an organization? It doesn't make sense. But also you facilitate learning a lot better as well with engaged learners. So here are some examples of some of the submissions that learners have put in. So we've got some really nice lichen imagery here. So this is part of our Discovering Lichens course. We asked, they have to put together a diary, essentially a lichen diary. So they go out once a week and they find examples of certain things. Typically, because it's an introductory course, it's like, take a picture of some lichens that you find. One, you have to work out if they are lichens or if there's something else like weird bryophytes or something like that. But also start to pick out maybe those features, maybe list the growth form, for example. And then our tutor can go through and go, oh yeah, that's great, that's super, that's amazing, that's exactly what that is. Yeah, you're right, it might be this species, it's probably that. But because you're getting lots of learners from across the country talking about the same thing but in very different habitats, you get a really nice cross section, and it really exposes people to different things, which is super. The other thing is, so we've got here, oh, wait in seconds, that is not what I wanted to do. So here, we've got this beautiful picture of someone's garden. And what they've done is they've had a look at the habitat around them. So we asked them to go into a green space and list the available resources for beetles. So they could go through, have a look and go, oh, do you know what? A beetle might be there, and this is the sort of beetle it might be. Oh, look, there's rotting vegetation there. It might have hydrophilids or something like that. But it was a really basic level of sort of like, look in your area, where you're going to find these things. And it's kind of the first step that people often miss when they're doing natural history courses and stuff like that. You sort of go into the taxonomy and then you go, these are the features, and then you go. But you don't often talk about how to find things or where to find them. So it was a really nice sort of soft start and soft skills to really get into the beginnings of identification of beetles. Below in the bottom right corner, we've got from the same course, actually, it was an assignment where we asked people to go and find an example of beetle and list what features it has, and maybe trying to make some assumptions of what those ecological roles might be. What does it look like? What shape of the antenna? And other things like that. And what it allowed people to do was sort of really cement that knowledge of, these are the features I'm looking for. These are the identification features. And you get lovely things, and they're fantastic talking points. Like, if you talk to any biological recorder, they will tell you the beginners find the best stuff, and they really do. It's just incredible. So yeah, absolutely recommend it. We've got a lovely picture here of a slug, and it's just to sort of highlight that these can be talking points. So someone put this into the forum in lichens, go, oh, there's a big slug. Like, oh yeah, well, this is a talking point talking about how lichens are food stuff as different organisms. And to be honest, slugs don't get any good stuff in gardens nowadays. So it's great to celebrate and go, do you know what? they're really important, and this is why, and this is what they do. So you've got this great opportunity to discuss stuff quite casually sometimes, and really sort of enthuse learners about the things that they're finding. So the next thing is little tweaks, big changes. This came off the back of a Moodle update. So we did a Moodle update at the beginning of this year. I feel like it was far longer ago than that, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of this year. And it was from a 3.0 version to a 4.0. So it's a fairly big change. We set up test servers. We put together we had groups of people going through and checking individual things. We putting different elements in place. We basically copied the whole of our Moodle infrastructure and updated it to see how it looked. We made all of these changes. We made introductory videos. We completely changed them. We made sure everything was ready for the get-go. So when we were ready to finally flick the switch and do the full update on the live server, we were ready to go. We did everything. Like, I think there were at least 7 of us working continuously, checking everything was working, and we were finding random people and just going, oh, can you look at this and see if anything is weird? How are you doing stuff? And we're watching how we were interacting with it as well. And the changes on the face of it don't seem that big. So this is what Moodle looked like, and then this is it after. So we've got an addition of an additional navigation pane on the right, and things look a little bit prettier, but essentially the change isn't that big, really. It just looks a bit more modern. But what happened overnight, which is something we did not plan for, is the behavior of people using it changed completely. It was insane. So people were no longer, so in the center you've got so this is the main course page, and we've got some text, and that's on the main course page. And typically what would happen before is people would go onto the main course page, they'd look at the stuff, so a resource, they'd open up a workbook, for example, look at resource, and then it'll come out and they'll go back to the main course page and then have a look what was there, if there was anything underneath it, and then move on to the next thing. What happened now was that people were using that left navigation pane with the purple bit in it to just flick between stuff. So they were no longer going back to that main course page, which meant that we had built these courses where we had, oh yeah, the next thing continue, like, has this, or be prepared for this, or you've got an assignment later, or whatever, and it had this extra information, but people were now missing that because they were navigating in a completely different way. And we just weren't ready for it, mainly because most of our people are repeat customers. So there was an assumption, I think, that you just continue to work in the same way. They could still do it in the same way, but overnight it just changed, and we had to swivel on the pin very quickly. I mean, luckily we did it in a period of time where there was minimal courses live, so it meant there was only a few things you had to do, but we did have to go through all of the courses before they ran to make sure that any elements were actually still visible and weren't hidden in some way, and only available on that main course page. The other thing was this tiny little question mark in the corner. When we were viewing it, even as a learner, so Moodle allows you to view things in different views depending on your permission. So as administrators, we can hit view as learner and it will show us what it looks like. That little button didn't exist, even when we were viewing as learner. And it caused me a headache, I've got to say. When you click it, it opens and it just has this generic stuff in. It's like, oh yeah, like some documentation about Moodle. Oh yeah, there's some policies, and it's basically Moodle stuff essentially. But what is there is that contact site support. We didn't know that was there. And what that actually did is you click on it, it opens a form, and then you type stuff in, and then it goes to an inbox. Because we didn't know it was there, and it wasn't listed in any of the documentation that we'd read about Moodle updates or anything like that from Moodle themselves, we didn't see it, which meant for about 4 days, when people put in a tech request, instead of using what we'd put in place before, so we've got Q&A forums for tech support, they've got technical issues, you can see it on the right, there's technical issues bar that says basically email us. And they all go to the same place. But some people had found this and were using this, and it would come through. One of the downsides of this is that, one, it doesn't tell you where people have come from. If they come through the tech issues forum, it tells me what course that is. So people would say, oh, this isn't working, and you would have no idea where they were, what they were doing. You'd have to search manually what courses they were on and stuff like that. So it took up a lot of time. all we had to do was basically set up something and have something so it was going somewhere. But a little seemingly change, although it was a big update, it was a fair, like on the face of it, the change isn't that big. It can have some big implications. So when you're looking at LMSs, it's something you need to take into account, and you need to have the ability to swivel if you need to. Be ready for it, be ready for that change and embrace it, I would say. Moodle was great because it allowed us to sort of prep, and we knew what was coming and we could drop it out when we wanted. But if you're using something else, like for example, LearnWorlds or whatever, they can update like that overnight, and you've got to scrabble around and sort that out. So be ready for it. And if you know that there is an update looming, put in some time to make sure you've got that time to swivel, because your things might not work properly. Interactive elements might not work in the same way. Your code behind the scenes might not work. So always take into account what may or may not happen, and don't assume that just because it's a seemingly little thing that it won't cause absolute carnage, because it can, even if you're prepping for it. So sort of the last thing is something I really, really care about, is accessibility. And through BioLinks, we had some consultations with the National Autism Society, and we've also been working with some money from the Foil grant to look at how young people are accessing things, but also neurodivergent people as well. And it gave us a lot of insight. And I feel like accessibility is always a second thought. It's never really a first thought, which I think is one, a terrible shame, because if people can't access your content, they can't be engaged by it, and then what's the point, right? But also, if you're making something accessible for one group of people, 9 times out of 10, it's probably great for everyone. So it's always good to have this in the sort of front of your mind, really, not on the back, at the front. It needs to be, do you know what, is this accessible, and this is why. I've put two resources here. So this was from our terrestrial invertebrates course, and at the time we didn't really have the know-how within Moodle to make things look pretty. I now play around with code like nobody's business. I love Bootstrap code; it's great, and me and Ellen play with it like no tomorrow. It's like spaghetti. It's fantastic. But here, what I did to make things look pretty is I put them in an image, so I could really play around with the image and go, do you know what? Let's put some color in there. Let's set this out in a different way that's not just text. Because we were really trying to sort of make this engaging content, and we got really good feedback from it. But this is how I did it. I took an image and I put text on it, and then I put that image in. What that meant, though, which I didn't know until we spoke to people like the National Autistic Society and other organizations, is that means that that information cannot be seen by some people. If you're using assistive technology, a screen reader, for example, you cannot access that information unless it's either somewhere else on the page in a different format, or you've got a really, really good image description in the background. One of the flaws, I think, of Moodle is that you've got a character limit for when you're describing images. So there's not very much you can put in. So what we've got in the habit of doing now, which I think is great practice, and everyone should do it if you're doing online courses, is having your information in some form of different format somewhere. Whether or not it's downloadable, whether or not it's a transcription somewhere, whatever, have different options and make sure that accessibility things, software, whatever, can access that. People are like, well, you know, that's only for blind people, but it's not, because actually you've got people like dyslexia, with dyslexics. They might use a screen reader to sort of read it out to you. There are so much free resources just for browsers for accessibility that you can just download and have on, and people aren't aware of it. You can change colors of things. If your content is of a certain format, it means that you can use overlays on your computer. You can download dyslexia fonts, which basically change the font on your page, which for any written content on my page, that would change instantly within Moodle. However, if it's stuck in an image, they can't see it. The other thing, which again is another thing that people don't often think about, is colorblindness. So we had a really in-depth and very insightful email from someone who was like, I love your terrestrial invertebrates course. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I've got a problem. I can't see anything on your imagery. Like, it doesn't make sense. And this is a good example where I've got red on green. It's one of the most common types of color blindness, and he just couldn't see where stuff was pointing. And it wasn't the only example of the colors that he couldn't see, but things like using contrast instead of color to convey meaning, if you're using it as some form of key, for example, or using patterns, is something that now we kind of do off the back, but it's never the first thing that people think of when they're putting together content. So it's something that needs to be done. There are other things to do with accessibility. So one is phrasing, how you're phrasing content. If you're using written content, I think yeah, what I think with written content is that people can really easily misconstrue what you're trying to convey by the way you're written, because you don't have that inflection or tone when you're talking in a webinar. If you're doing a video, a talking head video, for example, you can sort of use inflection in a way that will imply things. It's not always the best way, but people pick up on it more. If you've written stuff down, there is a lot more scrutiny, one on your grammar, but also just the way that it's written, because what you've written or what you're trying to say might not actually convey what you mean. So the way that you phrase things is really, really important, especially for neurodivergent people. But to be honest, it's good practice to make sure that the way that you're phrasing things makes sense. Avoid things like rhetorical questions. That doesn't always go down well. And some of the feedback we got from the National Autistic Society, and it's something we try and avoid now. The way that you're putting instructions together is really, really important for the same reason. And also, instead of having the same instructions in different places in slightly different formats, having one central core truth and then linking continuously to that. Because one, if you have to update your course for whatever reason or update that information, you only do it in one place, saves you time. But also, there's no, misconception, or do you know what, that said that and that said that, so which one's right, which one's not, or is that a different process? And you don't have that thought process. The features used within your LMS are quite important. Accessibility can also refer to different devices as well. Different devices work differently, so make sure that what you're doing, drag and drop questions cause absolute carnage in a lot of courses early on. We're like, oh, let's make this engaging, let's drag and drop stuff. It doesn't work on half the devices, especially iOS devices. Had a bit of a time with iOS devices, but only of a specific that there are a few specific versions of iOS software that Moodle doesn't like, which we didn't realize on early on. Now we make sure that anything we are using, it can be used across multiple different devices. There's always an exception to the rule, but that's what we're going for the majority. There's also learning preferences to take into account. So have different forms of content, imagery, audio, diagrams, written, you name it, put it in, and make sure there's a nice variance. One, it's novel and it keeps people engaged, but yeah, two, some people just might be better at one way than the other. I love a diagram. If you're telling me stuff, it doesn't really go in. You show me a diagram, love it. So I try and put as many as I can because I'm biased, but I try and put other things in as well. And the team does. It's something we're really, really passionate about. And ultimately, accessibility, if people can access your content, then they can be engaged with it. And if they can be engaged with it, then you can pass on the knowledge and you can pass on those learning opportunities. And hopefully it'll affect more people, and hopefully they'll engage and enthuse other people with it as well. So essentially, in summary, online is effective. Kieran spoke earlier about how you can go across vast parts of the country, even different parts of the world, in fact, and you can engage with these different people. And we've had people from the Outer Hebrides, we've had people who were on holiday in Spain attend our events, but also we were finding that they're useful. People were saying that they're useful for what they're doing, and people are engaging with them and enjoying doing them as well. What I would say is always assess your needs when you're looking at an LMS. How many people do you need to scale it? What sort of features you're going to have? Always look at both your needs, but also the learner's needs as well. And actually, is the LMS that you're choosing appropriate for what you want? You'll always need more time. Whatever you're doing, you'll always need more time. Whatever you think it will do, double it. It will take twice as long as what you think. Be ready and embrace change. Just it can just happen, and it will happen. Remember that online content does have a shelf life. There's this misconception again that you put a course out and it will just sit there for 5 years. Technology changes, plugins don't work anymore, links change, you have to continuously update. I reckon an online course done to a top tier standard probably has a shelf life of about 3 years before it needs to go through and be double checked and go through. I mean, you'd want to evaluate it probably at the end of every course run or every year, but I would say any major changes, you'd probably want to be looking at a 3 year period, assuming that you've got everything right the first time, which is never really the case. And ironically, I put it as the last point, but accessibility first. It should be the first thing you think of. It takes a long time to go back and add accessibility or change things to make them accessible. If you do it at the beginning, it's going to save you time, it'll save you money, but also it's way better for everyone else in your participants and getting engaged learners as well. So always do that. Yes, that's it. Kira's already shared this wonderful slide with you, but if you're interested in coming to any of our webinars at the end of this year, there's some here. We've got some from the marvelous BSBI. We've got Mark Duffel talking about the FISC, which is great. And we've got some other bits as well. But yeah, that's me done. Ready for questions.